Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Tim Burton's film Batman Returns, the second in the Tim Burton series of Batman films. This one is 1992, I want to say. And I actually think this is a much more Tim Burton film than 1989's Batman. That was a very Tim Burton film in its aesthetic, in its style, in its sensibilities. But it was also a much more cartoonish film. The Joker is a much more sort of comic book, almost Looney Tunes type character in his, for instance, use of the gun where the barrel just telescopes out massively long and stuff like this. Jack in the Box stuff, whatever it is. So in Batman Returns, we don't have much of that cartoonishness. We do still have that very dark Tim Burton aesthetic, that sort of German expressionist inflected neo-noir, almost diesel punk style. We do have that type of aesthetic, but we also have much darker, grittier villains. We have the Penguin and Catwoman, and then Max Schreck is a sort of sub-villain. So, the reason I say this is more Tim Burton is actually mostly because of the aesthetics and the style of the Penguin and his henchmen, I guess. It's a circus gang. I forget what the name of it is in the film, but it's a circus gang. It is these like an organ grinder who has a Gatling gun in the organ thing, and as he cranks the organ, Gatling gun fires. These like demonic clowns and guy dressed as a devil who breathes fire and shit like this. And it is a much darker, grittier, but still non-realistic version. So again, this differs from something like the Christopher Nolan films, which tend to be much more grounded in sort of realism, in the action genre, as opposed to, again, that sort of Tim Burton neo-noir type aesthetic. So, stylistically, it's not as bright, it's not as playful as the original Batman, but it still has that sort of comic book sense, but it's a darker comic book sense than 1989's Batman. This is also the start of the two-villain style in Batman, which carries on from Batman Returns to Batman Beyond, and then into Batman and Robin. And we even get that with many of the Christopher Nolan films. I'm thinking back over them. Yeah. In fact, I think with all three of the Christopher Nolan films, we have that dual villain structure. So Batman is dealing with two threats. In this case, it's Catwoman, who's, what's her name? Selina Kyle is her real name. And interestingly enough, I talked in the video about Batman, how that film is really obsessed with origin stories. We get the origin stories for both Catwoman and Penguin in this film as well. So that desire to know where villains especially come from carries on through the films. So Selina Kyle works as a secretary or an assistant to Max Schreck, who's this major industrialist, generally well regarded by the people of Gotham, despite the fact that he's actually a super shady capitalist, corrupt dude. But Max Schreck is around. He's doing stuff. We come to find out that he is like dumping industrial sewage from his clean power plants. He's planning to stockpile, basically steal a bunch of Gotham City's actual power, electricity. He's murdered people. And he tries to murder Selina Kyle when she figures out, sort of, what he's doing with the power plant. And she's an incredibly like meek, submissive, insecure person. So he pushes her out a window. She crashes to the ground, and rather than dying, she's like, oh, now I'm back up. These cats who have surrounded me have revived me with their life force or something. She goes home, smashes up her apartment, finds a latex raincoat, cuts it up, makes this very tight bodysuit for Catwoman, puts little sewing things on her fingernail or on her fingertips as claws, and goes out basically to just sort of fight crime and generally attack everybody. Because she rescues one woman from being mugged, and even then she's not like, hey, you're welcome, woman solidarity. She's like, why do you suck so much, you woman who was getting robbed? So, I mean, this kind of makes sense in a way. This we know now, especially much more, I think, than we did in '92 when this film came out, about CTE and things like this, the impact of head trauma and how that can substantially change a person's personality, including bringing out violent or psychopathic tendencies. There's a ton of evidence about this because it happens to American football players, and Americans care about football more than we care about medical research as such. So we now know that makes a lot of sense. That's a legit origin story for how someone might go from this fairly meek, submissive, weak-willed person to a confident, not necessarily promiscuous, but sexually suggestive and violent person. That makes perfect sense. The other origin story we have in this is of the Penguin. The Penguin was born Oswald Cobblepot to, I forget what his parents' names were, the Cobblepots. His mother was named Esther, which we learn from their graves when the Penguin reemerges wanting to find his parents and goes out and locates their graves. I forget what his dad's name was. It was some weird name, but, you know. So Oswald Cobblepot was born with significant physical deformities. He has a thumb and sort of maybe one finger and combined bottom three fingers, sort of a mitten type shape to his natural hand. He has an excessively long pointed nose. And by the time we see him as an adult, he's very, very large, but very short. So he's extremely short, extremely stout. He has these sort of flipper-like hands, his long pointed nose. He also has somewhat sharp, jagged teeth, but we're not sure if that's something he was born with or something he developed over the course of a lifetime brought up in the sewers. So his parents are basically like, yeah, this is a fucked up looking kid that we don't want to raise, so we're going to put our baby in a basket and dump him in a river in Gotham in the winter. Basket gets taken down the river, down the creek, whatever it is, goes into the sewers where apparently he's raised by penguins or something in a zoo. The actual childhood of the Penguin is not really clear, and you sort of it's sort of like Jesus. You just skip over most of the stuff between when he's a baby and when he's an adult. Not that I'm comparing the Penguin to Jesus. They are, by most accounts, not very similar characters. But the Penguin, because he has been raised in the sewer, rejected from society, because of his physical appearance, etc., etc., he has developed a kind of psychopathy in which his ultimate goal is to inflict suffering on others, particularly by stealing the firstborn sons of the families of Gotham City, so that they will suffer the loss that he wanted his parents to have experienced when they dumped him in a river. So basically the plan is to murder a bunch of children. Now, as an origin story, it's all right. It's fine. It does what it does. The problem that I have with this is actually from a disability studies perspective, because what this character and what this origin story ends up doing is conflating physical deformity with violent psychopathy, which is a really, really problematic conflation, because there are, of course, long histories in the U.S. and elsewhere of treating people with physical deformities, mental or intellectual disabilities, etc., as inherently dangerous, as something to be feared. And this is where the movie is sort of weirdly ambivalent, because the Penguin points that out, right? He critiques Gotham society and his parents and human nature more broadly for fearing those who are different, for looking at his physical characteristics and saying, this person is bad, this person is undesirable. And of course, there's a long, long history of this. The eugenics movement was massively influential, and one of the things that eugenicists tended to advocate was the sterilization, if not outright execution or murder, of people with disabilities. And so there's this long problematic history of the oppression and erasure of people with disabilities. And the Penguin points this out, quite rightly. But then the movie makes him this psychotic villain. It makes him this villain whose goal is just to hurt people. And this is where it becomes problematic, because the film now buys into the very idea that the Penguin makes a justified critique of. And so, by making the Penguin this villain and linking that villainy to his physical characteristics, what the film in a way is suggesting is that the way that people with disabilities is treated is somehow justified. And it's justified in particular because people with disabilities are dangerous. And of course, that's generally not the case. People with disabilities are no more dangerous inherently than anybody else in society. In fact, sometimes less so. And so there is this weird moment where the film seems to forget the very cogent critique that it makes of how people with disabilities are treated in our society in order to then position the person with disabilities, the representative, the most visibly disabled person in the film, is presented as a villain, as a threat, as the thing that Batman, our hero, must destroy.